The Grand Council Hall buzzed with the hum of various alien voices, speaking in dozens of languages. No one could truly comprehend the vast diversity of species gathered under one roof, each having their own long history of achievements and power. At the center of it all stood the High Council, seated above the gathered representatives. Was the one voice that spoke for all civilizations in the galaxy, the one who decided what happened next. The being was ancient, far older than any of them, with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires from star to star. Today was a day of great importance. It was the day Earth was to make its first official step into the galactic community. The whispers of their arrival had spread like wildfire through the council chambers. Their presence was known, but no one had anticipated what was about to occur. As the doors to the council hall opened, the representatives fell silent. A single human stepped forward. He was young, dressed in a simple suit that seemed out of place amongst the elaborate regalia of the others in the room, and yet there he stood. With confidence that belied his appearance, the human raised his hand as if to silence the assembly, but it was not necessary. Their attention was already fixed upon him. The captain of the lone ship Earth had sent to represent them stood taller than anyone had expected, and as his voice rang out across the hall, the room seemed to hold its breath. He spoke of their mission with a certainty that stunned the assembled races. "We are here today," he began, "not with a fleet or an army, but with a single ship. Our ship," he continued in a voice that rang clear and strong, "is one crew and one vessel to represent the human race. We ask for your acceptance, not because we think we are better or stronger than the other powers present, but because we believe that our strength lies in our ability to face challenges against all odds, to adapt and overcome." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. The representative from the Zorth Alliance, an insectoid species with great military power, was the first to speak. "How is it possible that one human ship can represent an entire planet? Do you not understand the scope of the galaxy, the number of challenges it presents? The technology we possess far surpasses anything your species has achieved. Surely you are not suggesting you would send only one vessel to stand among us?" The human captain remained unfazed. "No," he said, "we are not suggesting that we are doing it. Because we believe in the power of our will, we believe that one ship with the right crew can face challenges that fleets would never dare to confront. We do not fear the unknown, and we do not run from it." A cold laugh echoed through the chamber, this time from the leader of the Menthar Dominion, a species that had conquered entire star systems. Their ships were more advanced than anything humanity could fathom. "What makes you think your one ship will even survive a day out there?" the leader asked, the space between his segmented eyes narrowing in contempt. "We do not know what will happen," he answered, "but we do know we will try, and when we try we will succeed against all odds." The council chamber fell into stunned silence. The human's words hung heavy in the air. As the leaders of the galaxy stared down at him, their expressions unreadable, the young captain had said nothing extraordinary, yet it was something no one had ever said before. No one had ever dared to declare such confidence in the face of overwhelming opposition. And with that declaration, Earth's fate was set. The council would have to decide whether to accept the challenge or dismiss them altogether. But one thing was certain: the galaxy had never seen a species like this before. The silence in the council hall was deafening. The eyes of countless alien species bored into the human captain, each race weighing the weight of his words with skepticism and disbelief. Whispers began to ripple through the room like the rustling of leaves on a cold wind. Some species exchanged amused glances, others leaned back in their seats with disdain, but all shared the same thought. No one could believe what they were hearing. A single human ship, no fleet, no army, just one vessel to represent an entire world in the heart of the galaxy. The Zorth representative was the first to break the silence, his voice a low buzz that seemed to vibrate the air around them. He stood up, his antennae twitching in agitation. He looked at the human captain as though he were an insect to be crushed beneath a boot. "You understand the significance of this moment?" he asked, his mandibles clicking sharply. "This council is composed of the galaxy's oldest and most advanced civilizations, each with fleets capable of wiping out lesser races in the blink of an eye. You come to us with nothing but a single ship and expect us to take you seriously. The human captain didn't flinch, his eyes locked with the Zorith's. Without hesitation, "We expect nothing but the chance to prove ourselves," he said simply, his words sharp and unwavering. Another voice interrupted the tension, this time from a tall and regal figure. It was the leader of the Vaith Dominion, a race of telepathic beings who had long since transcended physical limitations and relied on their vast mental powers to control entire sectors of space. The Vaith representative spoke with a voice that was both soothing and unsettling all at once. "What you fail to understand, human, is that this council was built on the idea of cooperation. We have worked for millennia to build something greater than the sum of our parts. One ship cannot represent your world. It cannot withstand the trials ahead. It will fail as all other lesser species have before you." The human's gaze never wavered. "We are here because we are willing to risk everything to prove that we belong among you," he replied. "This isn't about strength or numbers. It's about the willingness to face the unknown and to adapt to whatever comes our way. The human race thrives on challenge. We don't expect to win every time, but we'll never stop trying." The Mythar representative, the one who had laughed earlier, now leaned forward, his voice dripping with scorn. "You speak of trying," he said. "Your species has barely reached the stars. You are nothing compared to the civilizations in this room. One ship can only carry you so far, and it will not be enough against the dangers of the galaxy. You'll be wiped out before you even make it past the outer rim." The captain smiled slightly, and for a moment there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made even the ancient beings in the room pause. He didn't flinch or back down. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter, but no less certain. "We're not here to compete with you. We're here to learn from you," he said. "We know we're not the strongest, but we are determined, and we will grow. We will not be content with what we are today. We'll push the boundaries of what humanity can become, and we'll do it by facing every challenge that comes our way, even if it means doing it alone." The room fell into another hush, the word hung heavy in the air, as the representatives of the galaxy exchanged uncertain glances. They had heard many speeches before, but this one struck something deep inside them. Not many had ever dared to speak of the unknown with such confidence. Not many had ever openly admitted to being small and weak, yet refused to be intimidated by it. The council leader, an ancient being whose name was known to few, and whose age was measured in millennia, stood slowly, his eyes reflecting the weight of countless years. He spoke with the authority of someone who had seen it all. "The future of humanity has been sealed," he said quietly. "Your ship will stand or fall by its own merit. Let it prove its worth. Let it show us what your species can do, and we will see if you have a place here among the stars." With that, the council session was adjourned, but the question lingered in the minds of every being present: what would one human ship truly be capable of? The human ship, Endurance, hovered just outside the gates of the Galactic Council's outermost station, ready for the journey ahead. The crew, handpicked from across Earth's diverse nations, stood gathered on the observation deck, watching as the stars stretched out before them. They were about to embark on something unprecedented, a mission no one had ever expected them to take on. The mission was simple in its presentation, yet impossibly dangerous in its execution. Retrieve the artifact hidden within the Obsidian Nebula, a place that had destroyed more advanced ships than anyone could count. Captain Michael Harris stood before the crew, feeling the weight of his responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. The council had given them a daunting task: bring back an ancient artifact, a relic rumored to be lost within a storm of deadly gravitational anomalies, impossible asteroid fields, and territorial alien forces. The artifact had been sought by the greatest galactic powers for centuries, and none had succeeded. But the humans? They were expected to do it alone, with only their wits and a single ship. "Listen up," Harris began, his voice clear and firm. "We don't have the luxury of failure. The council might not believe in us, but we know what we're capable of. We're not here to prove them wrong. We're here to show them who we are. One ship, one crew, and one shot at something no one thought was possible. We've got the skills, we've got the will, and most of all, we've got each other." There was a brief pause, then the crew nodded in silent agreement. They had no choice but to press forward. The Endurance shot into hyperspace, leaving the familiar stars behind and plunging into the unknown. The journey was long, and the crew spent their time preparing, refining their strategies for what lay ahead. They knew that this would not be a simple retrieval mission. They would have to navigate through regions of space where few dared to tread, and survive dangers that even the most experienced pilots feared. As they neared the Obsidian Nebula, the ship's sensors began to flicker erratically, warning of the gravitational anomalies that would soon surround them. The nebula, a swirling vortex of dark matter and violent cosmic forces, was a place of legend. Few had ever entered it and returned, and those who had were rarely the same. The human crew would need to outsmart the dangers they were about to face, for there was no way to outgun them. "Ready your stations," Harris ordered, his voice calm but edged with the knowledge that their success depended entirely on their skill. "We're entering the nebula in 10 minutes. As they crossed the threshold, the first wave of challenges came immediately. Asteroids, the size of small moons, hurled themselves toward the Endurance, pulled by the chaotic gravity of the region. The ship's advanced shields flickered, struggling to keep up with the barrage of debris. The crew worked in perfect unison, the helmsman deftly maneuvering the ship between massive rocks, while the engineers kept the systems running at full capacity to prevent the ship from being overwhelmed. "Brace for impact," shouted the helmsman, narrowly avoiding a collision with a massive asteroid. The ship shuddered but held together. "Steady," Harris barked as the ship veered left to avoid another barrage. He turned to the communication officer. "Status on the artifact's location." "We're getting closer, Captain," the officer replied, sweat beading on his brow. "But the gravitational shifts are making it difficult to pinpoint." They pressed on, pushing the ship harder than ever before. The crew could feel the tension building with each passing minute. The nebula seemed to play tricks on their sensors, creating false readings and shifting gravitational forces that threw off their calculations. The Endurance was designed to handle difficult situations, but this was unlike anything they had faced before. "We're approaching the artifact's last known coordinates," the officer called out again. "But there's something else out here." Harris frowned. "What do you mean?" "Captain, there's a fleet of ships on our radar. Alien ships. They look like they're not from any species we've seen before." A chill ran down the captain's spine. The crew was alone in hostile space, and now they weren't alone anymore. A new threat had emerged. "Get ready for evasive maneuvers," Harris ordered, and the crew sprang into action, knowing the real test was just beginning. The Endurance lurched violently as another barrage of energy blasts tore through the space just ahead. Alien ships, sleek and ominous, were closing in fast. The crew scrambled to respond, the ship's systems flickering under the strain of the nebula's tumultuous environment. The once silent and eerie depths of the Obsidian Nebula were now alive with the hum of weaponry and the crackle of energy discharges. Shields at 60% and dropping fast. The chief engineer shouted over the comms, his voice tight with urgency. "Evasive maneuvers now," Captain Harris commanded, gripping the armrest of his chair as he watched the blinking red lights indicating incoming fire. His heart raced. They were surrounded by hostile ships and deadly gravitational distortions, and the artifact was still a distant hope, its location hidden somewhere within the swirling chaos. "Enemy ships seem to be of unknown origin, Captain," the communications officer reported, eyes wide as she worked furiously at her console. "They're not responding to our hails, and they're getting into position to trap us." "Can we outmaneuver them?" Harris asked, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple as he glanced toward the helmsman, who was working frantically at the controls. "We'll try," the helmsman responded through gritted teeth, "but the nebula's gravity wells are making it harder to escape. We can't outrun them, but we might be able to shake them long enough to make a plan." "Do it," Harris ordered, steeling himself for what would come next. The next few minutes would determine whether their mission would end in failure or a miraculous survival. The crew trusted each other, and now they would have to trust in their training and their instincts. The ship rocked violently again as another round of blasts hit, this time from the rear. The Endurance shuddered, but held its course as the helmsman guided them into a narrow opening between two massive asteroids. The enemy ships followed relentlessly, their sleek forms dodging the debris in pursuit, but the gravitational shifts were no longer just obstacles for the humans. They were also a deadly advantage. "Take us into the gravitational pocket," Harris barked. The helmsman's eyes widened. "Captain, that's risky. The gravity wells could tear the ship apart." "I know," Harris said, "but if we don't do it now, we won't have a chance at all." Without waiting for further objections, the helmsman made a sharp turn, sending the Endurance into the heart of a swirling gravity pocket. The ship jolted as the massive forces threatened to tear it apart, the crew fighting to stay focused as the ship groaned under pressure. The enemy ships, unable to adjust as quickly, were caught in the chaos of the distorted gravity fields. One of them veered dangerously close to a massive asteroid, its engines sputtering as it struggled to regain control. "Direct hit," the weapons officer announced, voice tinged with surprise. "The enemy ship is breaking apart." "Good work, Captain." Harris allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. The other ships were still pursuing them, more cautiously now but not deterred. "We've only got one chance to get to that artifact," Harris muttered under his breath. He turned to the tactical officer. "Plot a course through the nebula's core. If we don't shake them now, we're finished." The officer nodded, tapping furiously on the console. "Course plotted, Captain. It's a narrow path, but it might just work." "Do it," Harris ordered, bracing himself. The ship roared into motion, narrowly dodging the deadly asteroid field as they plunged deeper into the nebula's center. Every second felt like an eternity, the relentless pull of the gravitational anomalies threatening to tear them apart with each passing moment. The remaining enemy ships, seemingly undeterred, followed them into the heart of the nebula. But the path they were taking was treacherous, filled with forces that even the most advanced ships struggled to navigate. One by one, the alien vessels began to fall behind, their attempts to avoid the dangerous anomalies failing as they tried to match the Endurance's maneuvering. "One ship down," the communications officer reported. "Another is losing power, Captain." Harris exhaled slowly but didn't allow himself to relax. They had survived this phase, but the artifact was still out of reach, and the enemy ships weren't the only threat in the nebula. Time was running out, and the Endurance had to press forward, through the heart of the storm, into the unknown. The Endurance shot through the swirling chaos of the Obsidian Nebula, its engines groaning under the strain as it barreled toward the heart of the storm. The ship was battered but held together, its hull creaking with every shift in the gravitational currents. The crew was exhausted, but their determination had not waned. This was it, their one shot at proving that humanity could stand among the stars. They had survived the alien ambush, but the true challenge still lay ahead. "Captain," the communications officer called out, her voice tight with tension. "I'm picking up a signal. It's faint, but it's coming from the coordinates of the artifact." Harris leaned forward in his seat, eyes narrowing as he scanned the readings on the screen. The signal was unlike anything they had encountered before, almost organic in nature, yet laced with a pattern of cold, mechanical precision. It was coming from within the core of the nebula, deep in a pocket where the most violent gravitational forces converge. To reach it, they would need to navigate through a maze of cosmic anomalies that no ship had ever survived. "How long until we're in range?" Harris asked, his voice steady despite the rising anxiety in the pit of his stomach. 20 minutes, the officer replied. "But the anomalies are growing stronger. We might not make it through the next wave." Harris's mind raced. The mission was no longer just about retrieving the artifact. It was now about survival. He turned to the helm officer, whose hands were white-knuckled on the controls. "We're going to make it," Harris said, more to reassure himself than anyone else. "Get us there, no matter what." The helmsman nodded, sweat dripping down his face as he fought to keep the Endurance steady in the face of the relentless forces. The ship pitched and lurched violently as they navigated through shifting gravity wells, slaloming between asteroid fields and plasma storms that crackled with dangerous energy. The nebula, once a symbol of mystery and danger, had become an unforgiving gauntlet. Suddenly, the ship's sensors went wild, blinking red as the gravitational pull increased, distorting space and time itself. The crew gasped as the readings spiraled into chaos, and the ship lurched hard to one side, threatening to tear apart. "Shields at critical," the chief engineer shouted, his voice strained. "Hull integrity dropping. We can't hold much longer under this pressure." "We've come too far to stop now," Harris muttered under his breath. "Push through. Keep it steady." Just as it seemed like the Endurance might be pulled into a spiraling black hole of gravity, the ship jolted forward, surging into a calm pocket within the storm. For a brief moment, there was silence, a quiet unlike anything they had experienced in the nebula. It was as if the chaos had parted, leaving the crew to witness something impossible. Ahead of them, a massive structure loomed, an ancient monolithic object that defied all logic. It was impossibly large, its surface smooth and sleek, yet covered in symbols that none of the crew could recognize. The artifact was not just an object. It was an enigma. The signal they had been following was emanating from within, as if the very structure itself was alive, pulsing with energy. It was surrounded by a field of crackling light that shimmered in the darkness. "That's it," the tactical officer breathed, his voice filled with awe. "The artifact. It's a ship. The living ship." The realization struck the crew like a wave. The artifact they had come to retrieve wasn't a simple relic. It was something far more profound. This was no ancient artifact. This was a piece of technology that predated even the oldest civilizations of the galaxy. It was alive, and it was waiting for them. Harris stared at the shimmering mass before him, his mind racing. The implications of this discovery were beyond anything he had anticipated. The knowledge contained within that artifact could alter the course of the galaxy itself if they could figure out how to unlock it. "Captain, we're being hailed," the communications officer said, her voice suddenly sharp with urgency. "The signal. It's not just passive anymore. It's speaking to us." The crew fell silent as the words of the signal began to echo through the ship's comm system. The voice was like nothing they had ever heard before, rich, alien, and yet oddly familiar, as if it were speaking in a language of thought rather than sound. "Who dares disturb the slumber of the ancients?" The crew froze, staring at each other in disbelief. What had they just uncovered? The voice reverberated through the Endurance's hull, filling the crew with a sense of awe and dread in equal measure. It wasn't a sound they could comprehend with their ears alone. It was as if the words echoed inside their minds, weaving through their thoughts, and filling them with an understanding they had no words for. "Who dares disturb the slumber of the ancients?" Captain Harris's hand instinctively gripped the armrest of his chair, his mind racing. He had expected to find something extraordinary. But this was beyond anything he had prepared for. It wasn't just an alien artifact. It was a remnant of something far older, far more powerful than any civilization they had encountered. "I'm not sure how to respond," Harris murmured, his voice hoarse. He glanced at his crew, their faces etched with equal parts fear and wonder. They had come seeking an object, but now they faced a mystery that threatened to unravel everything they thought they knew. The voice returned, deeper this time, as if it were prodding their thoughts, seeking something. "You are not like the others. You are different, but you are not ready. Not yet." Harris clenched his jaw. The crew watched him, awaiting orders. He had led them through impossible odds before, but this was a whole new frontier. "Open a channel," he said, his voice steady despite the maelstrom of questions and doubts swirling in his mind. "We don't know who or what you are, but we're here to learn." There was a long pause, the silence stretching thin as the crew held their breath. Then the voice spoke again, this time slower, more deliberate. You are not of the stars. You are of the dust. You do not yet understand what lies beyond the edges of your world. The galaxy is a place of balance, of ancient forces that move in silence, unseen. Your kind has disturbed that balance, and now you must decide. Will you be the catalyst of change, or will you return to the dust from which you came? The weight of the words hung heavy in the air, and Harris could feel the magnitude of the decision they were being asked to make. A catalyst of change. What did that even mean? The voice wasn't just speaking of a physical artifact. It was speaking of the galaxy itself, of forces older than any civilization, forces that had shaped the universe in ways humanity could barely understand. What does that mean? Harris asked, his voice strained. What do you want from us? The artifact pulsed, its energy filling the space around the Endurance. The strange symbols on its surface glowed brighter, almost as if responding to his question. And then, unexpectedly, the voice responded, not in words, but in images, vivid and strange. The crew was bombarded with visions, flashes of long-forgotten galaxies, wars that spanned the fabric of space and time, creatures of unimaginable power, and civilizations long wiped from existence. The Endurance shook as though the visions were too much for it to contain, and some of the crew gripped their chairs to steady themselves. These were not simple memories. They were the echoes of an ancient forgotten history that humanity had never even dreamed of. One image lingered longer than the others, a dark, vast figure emerging from the edge of a dying star, its eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. The being seemed to consume the very light around it, its presence so overwhelming that the entire crew gasped collectively. The vision faded, leaving the crew breathless. Harris looked around at his team, their faces pale and wide-eyed. They had seen something beyond comprehension, something far darker and more dangerous than they could possibly have anticipated. "Captain," the tactical officer said, his voice trembling, "what are we dealing with? What did we just witness?" "I don't know," Harris said, his own mind reeling from the images. "But whatever it was, it's still out there. And it wants something from us." The voice spoke once more, its tone no longer threatening but knowing, as if it had been expecting this moment all along. "The darkness is waking. You have been chosen, human, not to save what remains, but to decide what comes next. The path is yours to walk. Choose wisely." The comms fell silent, leaving the crew to digest what had just occurred. The artifact was not just a relic, it was a key to understanding the forces that govern the universe, to an ancient power that could either reshape the galaxy or destroy it completely. Harris's heart pounded in his chest as the full weight of their mission sank in. They weren't here just to recover an artifact. They were here to decide the fate of the galaxy. And they had no idea how to begin. The silence in the control room was palpable, heavy with the realization that everything had just shifted. The artifact, this ancient entity within the Obsidian Nebula, was far more than they had imagined. It was not merely a relic, not just an object of value or knowledge. It was a force, a key to a cosmic game, and humanity had just been pulled into the center of it. Captain Harris stared out at the glowing, pulsing surface of the artifact. It loomed in front of them, its alien symbols dancing across the ship's display screens in a constant flux, as if communicating in some strange, impossible language. The voice, the visions, everything they had encountered had shown them that their mission had taken a turn into the realm of the unknown. "The darkness is waking," Harris muttered, his eyes scanning the crew. His voice was low, contemplative, the weight of his words heavy on his chest. He didn't know how they had ended up here or how to undo it. All he knew was that the galaxy, maybe the universe itself, was now watching them, waiting for their decision. "We're not just explorers anymore," the first officer said, her voice soft but firm. "We're involved in something much bigger than any of us could have imagined. This artifact, this force, It's more than just an ancient relic. It's alive, and it's making us part of its story. Harris nodded slowly. We've crossed a line, haven't we? Yes, Captain, the tactical officer replied. There's no going back. The question is, what are we going to do with it? The crew was quiet. Everyone had their thoughts, but no one had a clear answer. The visions they had experienced, the dark figure emerging from the dying star, it was all so much to process. They had come to this place seeking knowledge, seeking a way to prove humanity's worthiness among the stars. But now, they faced a choice that could reshape the very fabric of their existence. I don't like the idea of leaving here empty-handed, Harris said finally, his gaze returning to the artifact. We've come too far. But whatever this is, we need to understand it first. We need to know what we're dealing with before we make a move. He turned to the communications officer. Can you establish a deeper connection with the artifact? I need to know if there's more to its message. It's speaking to us, but we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. The officer hesitated, fingers hovering over her console. I'll try, Captain. But the signal, it's not like anything I've ever seen before. It's almost as if it's communicating directly with our minds. I'm not sure how much of it can be decoded with our technology. It's worth a try, Harris said. We're out of options. We need to understand what we're dealing with, or we might not make it back. The officer nodded, and with a deep breath, she activated the communications array once more. The ship's systems hummed, and the crew felt a strange shift in the air, as though the very space around them was tightening, drawing them closer to the core of the artifact. Then the voice returned. You have come to the crossroads, human, but you are not alone. There are others who watch, others who would claim what you have found. You must choose, remain in the dust and fade, or rise and shape what is to come. Your choice will echo across time. The voice was clearer now, its presence almost tangible in the air. The artifact pulsed brighter, and for a moment, the crew felt an overwhelming surge of energy, as if they were touching something ancient and powerful. It was as though the artifact was alive, thinking, sensing them. Harris swallowed, his throat dry. Others who watch. Does that mean other civilizations are aware of this? The voice responded with an eerie calmness. Yes, but not all would see this as an opportunity. Some will seek to use it. Others will destroy it to ensure their dominance. You must decide where you stand, human. Harris clenched his fists. The implications were massive. This was not just about survival anymore. It was about influence, power, and the very future of the galaxy. And they weren't the only ones involved in this game. The galaxy's most powerful races, the ones they had seen in the Council, were now aware of the artifact's existence. Some would want to control it. Others would want to destroy it to keep that power from falling into the wrong hands. Their very presence in the nebula had stirred a cosmic hornet's nest. Captain, the first officer said, breaking the silence. What do we do now? Harris's mind raced. The choice before them was more than just about what to do with the artifact. It was about the direction humanity would take from here. They could hide it away, return to Earth and pretend none of this had ever happened. Or they could take the risk, unlock the artifact's power, and stake their claim in a galactic game they had no business playing. But Harris knew there was no going back. The moment they'd come to the nebula, they'd already made their choice. They had decided to reach beyond their world, to challenge the unknown. Now they had to face the consequences. Prepare the crew, he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight it hadn't before. We move forward. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. And with that, the crew of the Endurance made their first step into a future no one had predicted. They had come for an artifact, but they had found a galaxy-changing power instead. Now, it was up to them to decide how to use it. The choice had been made. Captain Harris stood before his crew, feeling the weight of their decision settle over him like a storm cloud. There was no turning back. They had stepped into a role they had never anticipated, drawn into a cosmic web that stretched far beyond the reaches of their understanding. The Endurance hovered before the ancient artifact, its power now pulsing in sync with the ship's core. A quiet tension hung in the air. "Captain," the tactical officer said, her voice sharp. "The energy levels, they're rising. The artifact's power is growing exponentially. We need to be ready for whatever happens next." Harris nodded, his face grim. He could feel it too, the pull of the artifact, a force that seemed to be drawing them in, compelling them to act. It wasn't just an object they had come to retrieve anymore. It was alive, it was sentient, and it was waiting for them to make the next move. The crew was on edge, knowing that each second they spent in its presence pushed them closer to the unknown. There were no guarantees. They had been chosen, but whether that was a blessing or a curse, no one could say. "All systems remain stable, Captain," the engineer reported. "But we're being flooded with data. I can't even begin to process all of it. The ship's systems are starting to react to the artifact's signals. I'm afraid we might lose control if this continues." Harris turned to the communications officer. "Can we connect to it? Fully, not just the surface communication. I want to understand what it's trying to tell us." The officer hesitated. "I'm not sure we can even comprehend it, but I'll try." The crew watched as the officer adjusted the console, attempting to decode the torrent of data streaming from the artifact. The room seemed to grow colder, as though the very fabric of space around them had shifted. The air was thick with anticipation, and every person in that room knew that the next step could be their last. But there was no retreat. Not now. The voice returned, this time clearer than ever. "You seek understanding, yet understanding is not enough. You seek power, but power is fleeting. What you have uncovered is a door, not an answer. To open the door, you must first understand the cost." The ship shuddered as the voice spoke, the vibrations resonating through the crew's bones. Harris could feel the force of the words, like a warning echoing across time itself. The artifact wasn't just offering knowledge. It was asking them to make a sacrifice. "Cost," Harris whispered. "What do you mean?" The voice answered, its tone now laced with a kind of sadness. "To wield the power of the ancients, you must first sacrifice what is most precious to you. The path forward is not without consequence. Those who have sought the knowledge before you have paid the price, and many have fallen." Harris clenched his fists, his mind racing. This wasn't just a choice, it was a test, one that could alter everything humanity had worked for. Would they sacrifice their future for the chance to unlock the power of the ancients, or would they walk away, leaving the galaxy to its own fate? He turned to his crew. They had come together as one, and now they would have to decide together. "Do we push forward?" Harris asked, his voice steady but filled with the gravity of the moment. "Do we accept the cost and take what we found, knowing that it may change everything?" The first officer spoke first, her voice calm but resolute. "We came here to prove humanity's place in the galaxy. We've made it this far. If there's a price to pay, then we pay it. We're not just explorers, we're the future. And the future is ours to shape." The crew exchanged looks. It wasn't an easy decision, but the resolve was there. They had come for something more than just survival. They had come to leave their mark on history. And now, with the weight of the galaxy pressing down on them, they had to take the leap. Harris nodded. "Then we proceed." The ship's systems hummed, and the artifact's power seemed to pulse in response, its energy intensifying, as if it were alive and aware of their decision. The Endurance's hull groaned, as though it too was preparing for the shift. Harris felt the weight of the universe on his shoulders. This was no longer just a mission. It was the dawn of a new era. As the artifact's energy flooded the ship, Harris felt a surge of knowledge, of understanding that wasn't his own, filling his mind. He saw glimpses of the past, of ancient civilizations, of galaxies born and destroyed. He saw the hands of the ancients reaching out, their designs shaping the very fabric of existence. He saw the darkness that had been growing, waiting for its moment. And then, in a flash, it was gone. The surge of knowledge faded, leaving him breathless. The artifact, it's giving us its knowledge, the communications officer whispered, eyes wide. We have the power to change everything. Captain Harris looked out at the vastness of space, his heart pounding in his chest. The galaxy was theirs now. The path forward had been revealed, and the future of humanity, of all life, was in their hands. Then we'll shape it, Harris said quietly, looking at his crew with determination. We'll shape the future. And so, the Endurance drifted further into the unknown, carrying with it the fate of the galaxy and the promise of a new beginning.